think the biggest challenge is climate change, because we only have a small window of opportunity for taking action and keeping climate change to manageable levels.
Well, there's a very long list of things we need to do to stop climate change. There are many sources of emissions. So we will need to change the whole energy system. We must get rid of and stop using fossil fuels. No more coal, oil, or even gas. We must instead use mainly renewables. We also need to change all our buildings. We need to electrify our transport systems. We need to change industry. We also will need to change agriculture and our food. So it's a very long list. But in fact, there is also one thing at the systems level of the economy that we can do, which will make all of these things sort of happen by themselves, or at least be very much easier. And that is to change the structure of prices.
So carbon pricing is putting charges on the carbon content of a fossil fuel supply, and it can be done by simply extending existing taxes on fuel use. Most countries levy taxes on gasoline that we pay at the pump, so we can integrate into those taxes charges on the carbon emissions. Some countries are already levied taxes on coal. We need all countries to be levying taxes on coal and progressively increasing them over time. So that's all we have in mind, a relatively straightforward tax on all fossil fuels, petroleum products, coal and natural gas, and progressively ramping up these charges over time.
So how does a market work? So the government has to decide on a level of emissions that it's willing to accept at a point in time. And that's usually called the cap. And the cap is then broken into pieces that are called allowances that sum up to the total number of tons of emissions. And then you take those allowances and you either sell them to the private sector, or in some cases you give them for free if you need to. And then those companies are required to report their emissions and surrender or give up those allowances. If you have it properly enforced, the number of allowances is equal to the cap, and that controls the emissions. And then you meet your target. So it's a way of controlling total emissions. And then over time, you can bring that cap down and down to where we're actually trying to go to.
Well, I think the sort of research that EFD does has an extremely important and timely role. This sort of information is really vital for policymakers to help them craft legislation and to convey to the public and to stakeholders the rationale for the policy and what the impacts will be.
I think using carbon pricing method is unavoidable, because the root cause of over-emission of carbon, over-emission of air pollutants, because of free use of a clean environment. People have to pay for their emission.
And then when that's really working, people will be using less fossil fuel and we'll have fewer emissions. And then gradually we'll be on the pathway towards zero net emissions, which is where we need to be for climate stability.